Okay. We'll have to do a fashion show if you guys don't stop. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Senate Education Committee meeting. Committee, we are going to work on two things today. We are going to work a bill, and we are going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 455. So, let us start with, I'm looking for, what's my bill number? I saw the number 5. Help me out. Ooh, that didn't sound good. Here it is, Senate Bill 496. So if we could have a brief overview of that from our reviser, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 496 would establish the Parents' Bill of Rights. Subsection B of the bill provides a purpose statement on the role of education in a child's development and the role of parents in that child's education. Subsection C generally provides that every child has a right to direct the upbringing, education, care, and mental health of the parent's child. And then additionally, it lists out some rights that would be reserved to each parent of a child in the state. And you can see those on page 1, starting in line 18 of the bill. Additionally, subsection D would require the Board of Education of each school district to adopt policies that guarantee parents' rights to be involved in their child's education. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Could you start off by answering the question? I know that we went back and forth in testimony, but could you go over the question and the actual response based on the legislation with regard to vaccinations?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So if you look on page 1, starting in line 30 of the bill, one of those delineated rights guaranteed to a parent would be the right to make health care and medical decisions for the child, including the right to make decisions regarding vaccinations and immunizations. And I believe during the hearing, a question came up about how this interacts with the requirement of children to receive certain vaccines before enrolling in school. And as I noted at the hearing, this bill does not amend that statute. That statute is 726262, so that would still be in effect. And the passage of this bill would not change those requirements.
Okay, thank you for that. Yep, we'll go ahead and start with our guest senator today, Senator Holscher.
Thank you. And a little bit off topic here, but I am not able to connect to the legislative website. Is there an issue going on? You what? You had an issue too?
Sometimes you have to restart.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull up testimony. Saying the site can't be reached. Okay, thank you.
Senator Straub, did you have a question?
No, that was it.
It was just trying to get, that was the question.
At this point.
Go ahead, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me get back to my other screen I was just on. In 496 in the bill, I have a question about a number of things. If these rights are not explicitly given to the school district or state board of education, would they not already defer to the parent?
Yes, parents already have a number of rights when it comes to the upbringing of their children.
Follow-up question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is what I suspected. I think it just may be an issue of the past couple of years, especially of the mandates and from, I guess, people not being able to fairly defend themselves against these unconstitutional mandates that violate our very God-given rights as parents, as humans. Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Petty. No, hold on. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Tamara, I think you might have answered this for me once before, but in my notes, I couldn't clarify. Is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 spoken to in this in the statute?
I do recall looking that up for you, and I do believe it is referenced once in other places in the statutes.
That's right. I asked about other than just this one here. So that's right. One other, it's, okay, thanks.
Okay, so Senator Holscher and then Senator Dietrich. Okay, Senator Dietrich, you may go first.
Thank you. So I've got the bill pulled up, and it's been a while, but I'm rereading it. So as we often talk about carrots and sticks, is there a stick in this? You know, I don't see any penalty. I mean, what's the intent if one of these things is not followed to a parent's expectations? Do you know that?
The language in this bill does not include any particular enforcement mechanism.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't seeing it, but I just needed clarification on that. Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Just a reminder to myself, as I wasn't here, obviously, when the bill was heard, did this bill come out to us? I mean, this is strictly this committee's bill, correct? Without amendments from
This is a
the,
Senate bill that was introduced to this committee. Yes.
okay. And does it mirror still what is in the House, or has that one been amended?
It does not mirror any House bill.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, yes, Senator Petty.
So I'm not sure who I'm directing this question to. Maybe it's you, Madam Chair, or to the revisor. I think it's kind of got asked. So Senator Straub had asked the question about parental rights currently, and that those are there. And is this, within this bill, is it just kind of, is it working to put everything in one place of what is already in practice?
So I can't speak to why this bill is drafted the way that it is and the reasons behind its request. But I can say that legal issues concerning parental rights have been around for a very long time. There are a number of cases, not only at the state level, but also at the federal level that address this. And I will leave my response at that.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up, so as I look again at the bill, starting on line 15, that every parent of a child in this state shall have a right to direct the upbringing, education, care, and mental health of a parent's child. I may be a naive citizen of Kansas, but I think that's already there. I think that's something that it's been in practice for some time. And then it goes on to say the right to direct the education and care of such child. I had that right as a parent. The right to direct the upbringing and moral religious training of such child. I have that right as a parent. I've had that right as a parent. I think it's guaranteed to me already. The right to be informed of but then it goes to right to request, access, and inspect all written and electronic records maintained by the school relating to such child. Well, if you go to your school, I mean, you can look at their the transcript that might get sent to another school. That's available. The right to be informed of and inspect the curriculum, instructional materials, and any other materials that may be made available or taught to such child in a child's school. Here we start getting, it seems to me we start getting somewhat into the weeds in that how far does that inspect the curriculum, instructional materials, and any other materials that are made available or taught to such child in the school? I mean, there are a number of us in this body that have been involved in education. And school districts have and still do, and I think today even better than when I was teaching, provide access to materials. But I don't know to what level this actually speaks to. When it says the right to be informed and inspect, I mean, does that mean that any piece of material that's ever used in a classroom has to be inspected by every parent before it's ever used? That's a question that leaves me in not quite understanding where we're going if we are actually talking about parental rights. Then the right to attend public designated meetings of the local school board and the right to question and address school officials. That's available, and that's available today. You just have to go to the meeting, and you have to sign up to be on an agenda. And whether it's a PTA, PTO, or the board meetings. I mean, those things are things. I go down this list, and what concerns me about this bill, and I'll just speak from a perspective of a former educator, retired educator, in that I have to say, I looked at this bill, I read this bill through, and I thought, I would have to have, the way this bill reads, I would have to have a chair sitting by every student in my classroom. That this, in a sense, says that anything that's ever said or done or reflected within the classroom has to be audited by the parent. And I don't believe that that's what our parents in Kansas have ever wanted or want today. To me, education is a partnership, and it's a partnership of trust between the educator and the parent. And I feel very concerned that when we start putting into legislation those kinds of things that challenge that trust. And to me, this kind of legislation challenges that trust between, and it should be a positive trust. I didn't start off my school year, any year, disliking my students or wanting them to dislike me as their teacher or their families. Because that's not their expectation is that I'm going to be that learning tool for their children to move forward. And my expectation is, as a teacher, is that they're going to be that partner in that learning adventure. So I just see this kind of legislation as being so negative in that whole situation of that we want to have in our educational arena of relationships and trust between families. So I know I'm venting, but that's what I think this bill is totally unnecessary.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I take a whole nother perspective on this. I don't see it as negative. I see it as positive. It's reaffirming parents' ability to have a say in their child's education. If the COVID pandemic and the reaction to it taught us nothing, it's that parents are concerned and want to be more involved. As a retired educator and principal myself, we said this over, how do we get better parent involvement? How do we get parents to come to school? How do we have always advocated that we wanted that. Nothing in this bill is an audit. Nothing in this bill is additional work on a teacher that a teacher worth their salt isn't willing to provide to a parent who says, hey, I'm interested in what my child is learning. Madam Teacher, would you please share with me what my child is learning? That is every parent's right. And with all due respect, we've seen the outcome of parents expressing their opinions at school board meetings and being labeled as domestic terrorists. This bill is positive in that it reasserts parents' rightful responsibilities in regard to their children and their involvement in the school process. So I guess I take a different slant on that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are many of us that were in the classroom, which is good that we're on the Education Committee. If I saw this as an educator, I would see this as positive and say, of course, the parents need to know. I'm happy to provide that information to you. Welcome to, I taught school in Lawrence, and we had so many student teachers, et cetera, that would come over from KU. And welcome parents to come into the classroom to read with this small group of students. The more help you have, the more individualized attention the students can have. We heard yesterday in the Judiciary Committee after the meeting, there were parents coming up to us saying, I keep offering, the teachers are talking about how they're overworked. I keep offering to come in and help. We'll read with kids. They talk about how they can't get paras. They can't get other people. I'm like, you don't even have to pay me. I'm happy to come in and help. They said, we are not welcome to come into the classroom. Of course, that would make a parent feel like, what do you have to hide? You know, I'm just wanting to come in and help, whatever you would like for me to help you do. And I would like to think that as educators, we would have nothing to hide. Proud to have the parents come in, read a book to a child, listen to a child, read orally, whatever that may be. But when I reread through this just now, and I just think, you know, as a former educator, I just see this as basically saying to the parents that have been contacting us, I don't think that they want me in the classroom. I don't think they care. I've been, as my child was virtual, I might listen in or see some of the things they're working on, like, this is what you're doing in 5th grade? What? Why is that? I don't understand this. To be able to have the right to be able to see this up front, to talk to the teacher about this curriculum, their concerns about it, whatever it may be, yes, we can say they have the right, but they don't even know enough about it to be able to see. Yes, you can go to parent-teacher night, but you're not really fully informed of what curriculum it is that your child is working on. To just say, absolutely, you have the right to be able to see this material, I agree is a positive thing. I think I agree with Senator Petty. It is a partnership. It should be a partnership. It should not be an adversarial relationship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will share with the committee that, you know, legislators have been invited for the brown bag meeting with State Board of Education members. Ninja plug, there's one tomorrow. But one of the things that was brought up, and it was brought up by the State Board of Education, is what can we do with regard to IEPs so that those meetings are not as confrontational? So that those meetings are focused on what is best for the child that has identified needs. And examples were shared. And, you know, with IEPs, it is paramount that the parent is there to advocate for the needs of their child. And we have heard stories. I have a constituent, actually, that had been a special education instructor. And when she went to the high school for her son's IEP, there were only 12 of the 8 teachers that showed up. They didn't have the current grades for the child. They didn't have anything. They didn't have a new draft of new goals for a new IEP. And that was very troubling to the parent. When you have a high school student that is looking at finishing up, graduating, and moving on, to have that lack of participation. And she was frustrated, and she said, you know, she made it known that she was frustrated, which then kind of created a more adversarial approach. So IEPs, we already know. When we hear that from the department, you know, from State Board of Education members, that's an area that we know we need to work on and help our school districts to really establish that firm foundation of partnership with the parent, particularly kids with identified needs. I will say this about this particular bill. The Parents' Bill of Rights addresses several issues that we've had hearings on other bills before. And I don't want to minimize this, but on the one hand, other bills, the complaints were they were too restrictive. By this date, this must be done, that there was a penalty and things like that. So this Parents' Bill of Rights does not have a stick. It identifies clearly what we know to be true, but it codifies it into printed statute. It also addresses those concerns. I can't have my materials for the year ready by July 1. I can't have my materials for the semester uploaded by the start of the school year, things like that. So when you take away that restriction and you take away the stick, then you will have what Senator Petty addressed. You know, it's not clear cut. It doesn't say exactly. Well, if we want folks to embrace the Parents' Bill of Rights, it's probably best that we not build this 10-foot wooden fence around it so that school districts can work together, administrators with faculty, counselors, other staff members, to come up with what is the best way to achieve owning up to that Parents' Bill of Rights from their standpoint. It also puts that onus on the parent. These are responsibilities for you as well. If you're concerned about what your child is or isn't learning, have you met with the instructor? Have you found out what really is the instructional plan for that particular course or for that particular grade level? So I see it as a balance. It really is essentially a call to action for everyone, the community, those that work within our schools, the parents, and it's got that child in there, and I think it is very child-focused, which I think is a positive thing. Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You did.
Did you have a question?
You did ask it. You asked if it was identical to the House version, if we'd had heard it, if this was actually a Senate bill, and I did answer that question. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 2, in line 16 of the bill, the Board of Education of each school district shall develop and adopt policies to guarantee the parent's right to be involved in a child's education. As a virtual public school parent, if I do not reside in that school district, how would I go about addressing this with the Board of Education that is over the public virtual school?
So if it were a public virtual school, you would talk with that administration, or you would absolutely talk with the public school district that virtual program is tethered to. Senator Petty. Okay, and then Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to comment on the fact I know a comment was made about parents not being welcome, and I think we do have to remember that school districts, school boards have, during the last 2.5 years, have had to make tough decisions about providing for the safety of the students within their buildings. And so for that reason, most school districts have limited the number of parents that have been allowed into buildings because of health concerns. And I'm, from my own experience, yes, if parents were willing, we also have, we should all be aware that we have set up certain guidelines for people to be in our buildings now. And so it's not as open as it used to be that a parent could just come in. They many times have to get a background check and do a variety of things in order to be able to come to the building. So we, as a legislature, have put those things in place. So I just would remind us that we sometimes put in things that maybe limit the access that we want to see happen. I did want to ask a couple of questions on page 2, and we were talking about this bill, and starting on line 28, when it talks about object to any learning material or activity on the basis that such material activity harms the child or impairs the parent's firmly held beliefs, values, or principles, and withdraw such child from the activity, class, or program with materials is used. You know, I'm I'm not sure how to take this. I mean, when I was teaching, I did have occasion when I would have a child that, because of their religious beliefs, their families didn't want them to be involved in certain things. But I guess I'm trying to understand this piece and how, when it comes to a learning activity, what exactly that would mean. The other question would be number 4. And my question on number 4, it says, challenge the material or educational benefit of any book, magazine, or any other material available to students in the school library, such that a successful challenge results in the removal of the book, magazine, or material from the school. So does that, in essence, mean that if a parent, because since this is the Parents' Bill of Rights, that it is if a parent would say they don't like a particular book or a magazine, that the outcome of that challenge would have to be that that material was removed? I guess that question would be direct to Jenna. The first question, I guess, would be you, Madam Chair.
So we don't have a Jenna,
I'm sorry.
but
Tamara,
I think, yeah.
change the beginning letter. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on page 2, those paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are requirements for policies that the local districts would have to develop. So it would depend on the district and what policy they develop as to what those particular things in paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 4 would actually look like at a local level.
And I think we have examples of some school districts already have in place a process for parents to express concern. Senator Holscher.
Did I ask my question already? Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Sorry. It's been a long day. I do have a question in regard to IEPs. Where are we currently in terms of funding levels with special ed? And maybe Tamara, do you know that?
I think that we're going to need to get that from JG. With regard to funding for special ed, it is not, it's an aspirational goal. I think all of us have received when we entered the Senate chambers, if not last week, it was the week before. I think that there were some distributions today as well to our Senate offices with regard to please fully fund special education.
Okay, thank you. Because, and I don't know, the number that is standing out in my mind is 82%. And I don't know if that's current or anywhere near where.
I believe it is less than that. And part of that, when we set that aspirational goal, is what was committed to by the federal government that they have never provided. Are there any other questions? You have a follow-up?
Yes, if I may. Okay, thank you for that information. Because I am concerned that obviously our professionals are spread very thin in respect to if we're only even at 82% of that special ed funding, that of course that does present difficulties for them to be able to handle the volume of cases. And I do want to answer something that was mentioned before about the labeling of domestic terrorist. I've attended a lot of meetings in Johnson County, and there was a group of people who came in wearing those T-shirts, I mean, self-labeling several months ago. So I just want to make sure that that is clarified, that people understand that that label was not given to them as far as a particular group that was showing up at school board meetings. They came forward wearing those T-shirts. You know, I guess my concern with this is it feels like there's an insinuation here that there's not transparency at our public schools. I have 3 kiddos, 1 just graduated, 2 still in public schools. I mean, the things I'm hearing is that if I'm interested in what my child is learning, I should be able to find out. And you can find that out through email, text, you know, asking your child, asking the teacher. There's so many avenues to doing that. And I guess my biggest concern is, you know, after 2 years of a pandemic with a lot of intense criticism on our public schools, it just doesn't feel very supportive at these times. So I appreciate the efforts, but like I said, that is my biggest concern with this legislation. Thank you.
think the only thing I will comment on that is, though the funding is still aspirational for children with disabilities, I think it's a stretch to say that they're spread very thin, because what we have heard from school districts is that they use other funds. So it isn't so much a staffing, but it is the utilization of funds. Committee, at this time, are there any amendments to this bill? I'm not seeing any. So do I have a motion to pass Senate Bill 496 out favorably? Senator Erickson, do I have a second? I have a second from Senator Gossage. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Senate Bill 496 passes out without amendment. Committee, I'm now going to turn our direction to our hearing on Senate Bill 455, which is allowing K through 12 students to transfer to and attend school in any school district in the state. So if we could please start with an overview from our reviser, Tamara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 455 would require school districts to allow non-resident students to enroll in and attend school in the school district. Currently, local boards may, but are not required to, permit students who are not residents of the district to attend school in that district. Senate Bill 455 would amend current law to require school districts to adopt policies to determine capacity limits of each grade in each school of the school district, and subject to those capacity limits, enroll transfer students in the order in which the district received transfer applications. A transfer application would be prescribed by the state board, and transfer requests made on that application would be made to the non-resident school district. The school district may approve or deny the transfer request based only on the capacity limits or on policies adopted by the school district regarding the student's high rate of absenteeism or repeated suspensions or expulsions from school. If a transfer request is denied, the bill would provide for an appeals process. Transfers may be granted as one-year transfers that could continue after 1 year, subject to board approval, or continued enrollment could be denied based on the school district's capacity or other exclusion policies that I just mentioned. School districts would be prohibited from charging tuition and fees to any non-resident student except for fees that are otherwise charged to every other student of the school district. The bill would prohibit a non-resident student from transferring more than twice per school year, except with regard to students in foster care. That restriction would not apply to those students. Additionally, the bill would require each school district to submit to the State Department of Education the number of non-resident student transfers approved and denied by each school district, and whether those denials were based on capacity or in accordance with the policy adopted by the board. The Department of Education would then be required to report that data on its website. The bill would also require the Legislative Division of Post Audit to randomly select 10% of the state's school district and conduct an audit of those districts' non-resident student transfers. If the audit were to find that a school district inaccurately reported capacity levels, the State Department of Education would be required to determine the capacity levels for that district. The bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, what questions do you have for our reviser? Senator Dietrich?
Thank you for the explanation. So if a student is asking to transfer into a school district, but the school district doesn't have capacity in that grade level, and the board, if I'm reading this correctly, and the board denies or the boards are the ones who either accept or deny. So they deny the request, they can then appeal it, and then if they still deny it because there's no room, they can appeal to the State Board of Education. Is that how the process works?
Correct.
So there could be hundreds of those.
Potentially.
Potentially. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Petty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have a few questions. I'll go along with that one. Okay, so that process that you just went through, that process, if I'm reading this correctly, that process could take at least 3 months.
think that is, I don't know that that's something for the reviser. I think
Okay.
opponents can answer
Sorry,
that.
I'm just going to say, it could take a long time, because you did clarify those steps. So along with that, and maybe that's not clarified in this bill either, is, so as that's process is, that process of appeal is continuing, does this bill speak to where that child would be in school at that time?
The bill does not, but presumably they would not have been accepted by the receiving school district at the time of the appeal.
Gotcha, okay. And on the next section where it says each year the legislature officially post audit, that one about the 10%, who determines the accuracy based on what?
I think that's, again, that's going to be, someone from post-audit would need to answer that, or someone that's a proponent.
Okay, what's in the bill, that's why I'm asking. Okay, so then,
Just keep in mind, bills are drafted as requested.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is not Tamara's bill. She drafted it.
understood. I know it's not Tamara's bill, and
Yeah.
she is our reviser, so I'm trying to see where, if this is based on, you know, sometimes it's hard to understand if what it's based on. There is, and I guess this would probably go back to whoever's going to be a proponent. So in the bill, it does talk to, by each day of January, April, July, and October, the Board of Education of each school district shall determine the number of non-resident students the school district has at the capacity to accept. And those, so there, that number has to be in place even though in July there's not even school. So that's, okay, you can't speak to that. On page 7, it says the Board of Education of any school district may make and enter into contracts with the governing authority of any accredited school. Does that mean they would pay? Is that what that means there?
So on page 7, what you're looking at is existing state law.
Okay. It's just updating the word from pupils to students.
Correct, because of the amendments going from the may allow non-resident students to requiring non-resident student transfers, there were conforming amendments that were made to existing statutes, and this is one of those.
Okay. All right. And this, I think, would be my last question. On page 9, where it says line 17, 18, 19, have graduated from the school district of residence of such students unless otherwise provided for it by the agreement. Does that, I'm not sure I understood, does that mean that if a student has been going to school at another school district, that their home school would have to reflect them as being graduated from that school district?
So again, this is existing state law, so if you'll give me a minute to read it, I can provide you an answer. But again, this is one of those conforming amendment statutes that had to be brought into the bill. Yes, so I think what this is saying is if a non-resident student attending a non-resident district graduates from the non-resident district, the home district has to honor that the student met the graduation requirements.
So does the home district have to issue them a graduation certificate, or is it the school district where they graduated from?
So this says in accordance with the provisions of the agreement, so it would depend on the agreement between these school districts, but it does say they shall be certified as having graduated from the school district of residence unless otherwise provided in that agreement.
Okay, my last question, Madam Chair, is the G.
Your second to last question.
I know it was. The G, I have to tell you, I've marked a lot of things on this bill. The G section, it speaks to charge, or the costs providing for the attendance of such students at a school shall be paid by the school district of residence in accordance with the provisions. of the agreement. So does that mean any time of the year? I don't know that I quite got what the provisions of the agreement were within this bill.
So anytime that this particular bill is talking about agreement between school districts, those agreements already exist in statute. And so, again, these are just conforming amendments with the underlying intent of the bill. And even though this looks new, this language is actually taken from a previous place in the bill on page 3, starting in line 20. It referenced the statute and the agreements that are entered into under this statute. So when we were amending that bill, we just moved the requirements that already pertain to that statute to that statute. So that way, all of the requirements for those agreements are in the same statute. So that is the purpose of what looks like new language, but actually isn't.
I'll just have to think about that sinking in for a while there. Thank you.
Senator Dietrich, you had a brief question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm trying to find it in here, but I don't see it. So is there any requirement that once a receiving district allows a student to transfer in, they have capacity, that they must remain in that district until they graduate?
No. So if you look at the top of page 4, starting in line 3, it does allow a non-resident student to be granted a 1-year transfer. And then it would be up to the board's discretion, depending on those capacity limits and their policies regarding high rates of absenteeism and repeated expulsions and expulsions, whether that student could continue after that 1-year transfer.
Senator Holscher.
Yes, thank you. That prompted a question. So is there a limit on the number of transfers or requests that can be made by a given student?
So a student can only transfer 2 times per school year. That is the only limitation for the student to transfer to a non-resident district.
Okay, and is that in regular statute or in this particular bill?
That is in this bill, and I will also note that the capacity limits would be a limitation from the school district as well, yeah.
So if I'm a parent with a student looking to transfer, can I essentially apply to 10 different schools and wait to see what happens?
You could.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pretty sure there's already regulations by the High School Activities Association on transfer students and eligibility for high school sports. How would this bill affect that?
So I can't speak particularly to any of the policies of the Kansas State High School Activities Association. The only thing I will note is that starting at the bottom of page 3, there in that last paragraph, it does say a school district shall not accept or deny a student transfer based on, and then it gives a list of those things. And one of those things, which if you flip to the top of page 4, is aptitude or athletic ability.
I'm pretty certain athletic ability, they can't decide yes or no based on that, but KSHA does require they have to redshirt if they're.
Right, that's my question is,
that transition.
I believe under the Activities Association rules, you have to have resided in a district, either reside, I believe you have to reside in that district in order to compete in sports. Is that correct?
I don't know anything about KSHA's policies. I would have to look that up.
Well, I think this would definitely affect that. So I think
that's something that we'll need some input on.
thank you.
Committee, let's start our hearing. Let's hear from our proponents, and we'll start, because of time, we'll give everyone, let's give everyone 3 minutes to speak. So we will start with Mr. Mike O'Neill, Kansas Policy Institute. Welcome to the hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mike O'Neill with Kansas Policy Institute. For anybody that's asking, this is not a bill that we asked to be introduced, but it's a bill that we heartily support. And actually, the questions tell me that it's easy to kill something by 1,000 cuts, and I want to take a little bit of a 10,000-foot view as to why we're even here on this issue. And we have all these debates about school choice and things of that nature. The fact of the matter is we have school choice in Kansas in public schools, and that school choice is for the people who can afford to do anything they want. They can move anywhere they want. They can go to private school. They can move across state to a better school. They can buy a house in 2 districts. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the kids that are at risk, the kids that are being left behind. And in what universe should the quality of the children's education be determined by their zip code? I mean, seriously. And that's the 10,000-foot view that we need to be talking about, is there's kids who are being left out. And we had testimony on the House side where we had a district that felt threatened by the fact that they were being complimented by parents from other districts wanting to come to their school. And what we're failing to ask is why? Why is the preferred transfer school a better opportunity for these parents and these children? Number one. Number two, what is wrong with the sending school or the school that they're trying to get away from? And it could be profound. It could be just looking at the student outcomes and saying, our district is failing to get the job done. This district over here is getting it done. That's where I want my child to be educated. And they ought to have that opportunity. And we can talk about the mechanics of how that works until the cows come home, and you probably will. But let's not forget the reason that brought us here is we've got students who need to move to a different district to have a better educational opportunity. Not all districts are created equal. That was pointed out quite vividly by a recent public announcement by the Blue Valley and Olathe School District. Quote, while we can certainly empathize with parents in lower performing districts, both Blue Valley and Olathe are among the highest performing districts in Kansas. And as such, would find our districts overwhelmed with requests from non-residents. Well, the horror of that people would want to come to that school district. Without intending, quote, without intending to sound elitist, it's nonetheless true that housing costs in our district often provide a check on resident student growth. If that isn't elitist, I don't know what is. If anybody stands up in here and say every school district is just fine and dandy, they need to stay right where they're at, they're absolutely wrong, and this is proof of it. There are school districts that are better than other school districts in terms of getting outcomes. We can leave athletics alone because there's rules to govern that. Anyway, we support the bill.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Maddie, I think it's Ashauer, Deputy Advocacy Director, Excel in Ed in Action.
Thank
Did I
you.
get any of that right?
So close, ashore, like
Sure.
land ashore. Is that a saying? No, I don't believe it is. Excuse me. Thank you so much, members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Maddie Ashore. I am here representing the Foundation for Excellence in Education. We are a think tank, a national bipartisan think tank that that works to promote a set of interlocking education reform policies that lead to significant gains in student academic achievement across student populations in Florida in the early 2000s. Open enrollment is one of those policies, but I'm also here today because I'm a product of Colorado's open enrollment system. So I've traveled here today to articulate the enormous difference this policy shift could make in the lives of Kansas learners, as it did for me. In the 5th grade, when my mother saw me stagnating academically and struggling to fit in at my neighborhood school, I was a freak for Harry Potter and a nerd and needed to find my people. My mom identified North Middle School as the next best option. Even though North sits in a neighborhood that my family could never have dreamt of living in, my mom simply filled out a form and off I went. That's it. At North, I found the International Baccalaureate program and a community of Harry Potter nerds, and those two things just weren't available to me in my neighborhood school or in my zip code. So it's difficult for me to imagine a system that doesn't encourage movement like this. So Kansas districts have actually already proven that they understand this perspective, demonstrated by the rules and practices and systems that they already have in place and the agreements that districts have already built to create support for this kind of free student movement. The total number of students who take advantage of existing open enrollment practices would make up the 6th largest district in the school. SB 455 is a keep doing what you're doing bill in that it leaves complex decision-making about funding and capacity to local experts. What SB 455 is really doing is sending a clear message to parents like my mom. If your kid isn't thriving, here is some power to find what works better, and we will have your back in ensuring fairness. SB 455 takes Kansas from being one of the 34 states with voluntary open enrollment policy to one of the 28 states who make it mandatory. SB 455 takes a smart approach to open enrollment by centering both students and local control and would be a huge win for Kansas families as we work to recover lost learning from the pandemic and adjust to the post-pandemic world. For these reasons, Accelerate in Action urges your support of Senate Bill 455.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Craig Halsey. It's written. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Jonathan, you are here to speak in person, correct? Okay. I had you down as written, but welcome.
I'm here.
Okay.
So, thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is John Luth. I am the Deputy State Director of Americans for Prosperity, and I'm going to do my best to beat that 3-minute timer. Comes down to this, folks. Senate Bill 455 is a bill that will literally change the life of Kansas children across the state. Right now, we have a system that tells them this: if you are not from a financially wealthy background, or you are not well connected enough, or willing to lie and say that your child lives in a different district with somebody else, you're allowed to slip through the cracks, silently suffer, and hey, that's just the way that the cards fell. Sorry about it. So we can either keep supporting a system that we see has one-size-fits-all ideas and keep trying to support the idea of that system and let those families silently suffer, slip through, and watch as Kansas continues to fall behind. We have 44 states in the District of Columbia that already have legislation that allows this very thing. If students can't even move between public education schools, we have spent years seeing students have opportunities rejected to them because it would take them outside the public education system. Well, we're here today to talk about something inside the public education system. And if we're telling them they can't move there and you can't have options outside the public education system, it sounds to me an awful lot like we're just telling students, hey, you get the hand you're dealt when you're born. Too bad. And that's just not acceptable to me. And I can't believe that any one of us in this room wants to watch that happen. At a time when, according to the United Van Lines National Mover Survey, Kansas has consistently in recent years ranked within the top 10 most moved out of states, and most recently ranked within the 5th and 6th most moved out of states, parents care about education. Parents care about educational options, and we have seen that time and again, especially over the past couple years. We have seen a new spotlight put on education. We have seen it come to light, the failures that we have, and we have an opportunity to fix those failures today. We have an opportunity to provide opportunity. That's all these kids are asking for. That's all these families are asking for, just a chance. And right now, we're not giving them that. So we stand here today to ask you to support this bill. We believe it is an important first step among many that we can do to send a clear message to Kansas families and parents. It is that we hear their concerns, we believe in their concerns, and that regardless of their background or situation, that doesn't set a ceiling for what their future gets to be, especially when it comes to education in Kansas. I'm happy to take questions at the appropriate time and once again ask for your support on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, that is the end of our proponent in-person testimony. What questions do you have for the speakers? Senator Hulscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, what about transportation needs? So you have a child attending one school and they end up going to a different school. How do they get there?
Anybody? Anybody?
No, that is an excellent question. This bill obviously doesn't deal with that. And I think that in this particular instance, those families would be able to figure that out. Right now, though, that's not even a question they get to think about. That's not a question they get to ask. Kansas families are resourceful. Given the opportunity, they'll go find that. They'll get there.
Okay, because
Do it a little different in this committee.
sorry.
So if you have a follow-up, you simply
if I may,
say,
please.
you may.
Okay, so the concern then is if we have children who are falling through the cracks, they potentially don't have, I mean, it could be a financial situation. They probably don't have transportation to get them from point A to this different school at point B.
John Luth, Deputy State Director, Americans for Prosperity. I would say, again, just to go back to what I just said, I don't know that we can make that assumption, especially when parents have not even been able to ask or consider that question. Until we have given parents an opportunity to ask and consider that question and have that opportunity, it's impossible to know whether or not they're capable of doing that. And again, I think parents are resourceful. We've seen that to this date. We've seen that over the past couple of years as education has shifted. And I think that those parents are going to continue to be resourceful. And it's a question of whether or not we can help them along in that or not. And this bill will do that.
Okay, I see that Mr. O'Neill wants to speak. Come forward and introduce yourself.
Mike O'Neill, Kansas Policy Institute, and I think Tamara can probably do this better than I could, but we're still contemplating current law where you have agreements between districts, and transportation is covered on page 8. The agreement shall make provision for transportation of students to and from the school attendance center, but this is usually done in a cooperative agreement between the districts.
If you would stand for one quick question. With regard to what I have heard, large school districts, what is made available to students is not always anything other than what the boundary is. So is there anything in here that allows for the parent to apply for a transfer to another school within the district?
Not sure I followed the question.
We have school districts that have boundaries, and you go to Eisenhower Elementary because you live within the boundaries of Eisenhower Elementary, where you know
Oh.
that the needs of your child would be better served by, let's say, Lincoln Elementary.
Interesting question. I'm not, so you're talking about intra-district
Yeah.
transfers. That's totally by agreement of the receiving school, as I understand it. Tamara can correct me if I'm wrong.
It just does not address anything within one school district. It is just a neighboring. Okay. Senator Dietrich, did you have a question?
I believe, and this is the reviser could look at this for me, but I believe there are some counties where the districts cannot drive their buses into another school district without permission of the school board. Shawnee County is one of those. I don't know about the others, but I can't take my buses, Auburn Washburn, into 501. I can cross through on my way to an athletic event. But so I think transportation might just be a little, because it's in statute, might be a little iffy there. So just something to look at, that's all.
And I think we just heard a question with regard to how do they make those accommodations with athletic competitions? Driving through. Okay. There we go. Okay, any other questions for the three? No? All right, we're going to move on to opponent testimony. First up, we have Jerry Henn, Assistant Executive Director, USA, Kansas, and Kansas School Superintendents Association. I'm sorry. I know, we're going to run a little late.
Okay,
Welcome, Jerry.
thank you. I am Jerry Henn, Assistant Executive Director of USA Kansas, and represent Kansas Association of Secondary School Superintendents as well. I think as we look at this bill, we look at it from a standpoint of we already have 21,000 plus students in the state of Kansas that are actually going to different school districts right now that are not in their residential area. So we think that this is a bill that really doesn't need to be there, doesn't need to be a law at this point. We already have that amount of students that are currently going from school district to school district. I think to answer the question also about within districts, I think in the bill, it also states that this is simply from out of school districts. So I think that the bill kind of takes care of that. I think one of the concerns that we also came up with as we were reading this is a huge concern that if a student is transfers in to like the 3rd, 5th grade, whatever grade, the very next year you reach capacity, then that district has reached a situation of, do we ask that student to leave, or do we take on the expense of hiring another teacher and start looking at making our classrooms smaller? I think that becomes an issue that districts would then have to answer. And you definitely do not want to take away the consistency of an education for a kid if they simply have to move on after that year. I don't think I would like to think that districts would not do that, but unfortunately they may be faced to do that. The other thing that I would add that's not in my testimony is that in the many districts that I've been in, I never once had this issue. We always accepted kids as long as they met the criteria that we had set in place by our local boards. And we believe that this should end up being a local decision and needs to stay there. So I'll stand for questions as necessary.
Thank you very much. Last up, we have Mark Tallman, Associate Executive Director, Kansas Association of School Boards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try not to be duplicative. You've heard about how, in many ways, common this transfer already is. So I do want to raise, I guess, a couple of questions. Second page of my testimony, I lay out the reasons why I think some boards, and it's a relatively small number of boards, do not accept students from other districts. And I think a lot of that may just have to do with the attitude of folks in that community. For example, those that have chosen higher tax rates or having to build new buildings that you would want to be concerned about. And the fact that this could create additional issues around areas like special education. But what I'd most ask you to follow on if you work this bill is to address some of the technical questions that are part of this. Because it seems that the proponents have kind of said, you know, we have these barriers we need to tear down, apparently because local boards have put them up, but the definition of capacity would be a local issue. Yet schools would then be audited on whether they're following the policy that they have the ability to put into place. Likewise, the bill says you may limit capacity for things like attendance and behavior, including but not limited to those factors, which then doesn't give any guidance what other factors could be imposed as long as it isn't discriminatory, which our lawyers would already tell school boards you cannot discriminate if you have open policies. So, for example, if a board wanted to adopt a policy saying we do not want to accept non-residents, that is not discriminatory on any of the grounds that are set forth in the bill. That clearly isn't the intent of the bill, but so I think it creates an area where we would expect a great deal of litigation over what is capacity. If it's not defined, and it's up to the local board, but the concern is that local boards are keeping people out, how do we resolve that? And then the final question is it worth the priority of local time or post-audit to 4 times a year have to calculate, post, and potentially audit a capacity limit, which again is not defined in the bill? So again, our view is this would probably not make a great deal of change across the state because we think most people are relatively happy where they are or are at capacity. Last thing, I guess I would disagree a little bit with a previous conferee. We would see transportation costs as a major barrier. And so if the idea is to say we really want to open opportunity, but only for kids who can find a way into another district, there's a group of kids you won't be addressing, and under current law, boards could go get those other districts. They don't get state aid to do so. Be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, committee, we do have opponent written-only testimony from Dina Horst and Ben Jones, legislative liaisons of the Kansas State School Board, from Dr. Tanya Merrigan, USD 229 Blue Valley Schools, Dr. Brent Yeager, Superintendent of USD 233 Olathe Public Schools, and Lauren Tice Miller, Director of Government Relations and Elections, Kansas National Education Association. Committee, what questions do you have for our opponents? Senator Holscher, and then Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe Mark is the right person for this, but you did talk about this. There's already great flexibility, and I see this in Johnson County among our schools. Is there any numbers or anything as far as number of kids that already go to different schools, cross those boundaries? I mean, I know a large number myself that they go to a different school.
There's over 20,000 students that attend another district. There are only 9 districts in the state that did not report any non-resident students. Now, there are a number of districts that their policy may be to accept, for example, students of employees or some criteria like that. But most districts, I think the state average is about 4.5% of students across the state are going somewhere else. In some districts, that's double-digit percentages. In others, it is smaller. It's much less common in the larger, more urban areas. It is very common across more rural parts of the state.
Thank you.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a similar question in that, is there a limited number of school districts that are currently refusing to take out-of-district students?
Well, we don't know the specific policies. As I said, there are only 9 of 286 that have no non-resident students reported.
As you said, some may have a policy
Right.
not to take. out-of-district students, but they do allow like children of an educator or children of a staff member.
I don't have the numbers right in my head. We kind of went through and indicated there's, I'm thinking maybe 20 or 30 districts where it might be less than 0.5%, and it kind of moves on up. So there are clearly those that do limit the number of out-of-state. I don't know that districts have to report those policies, so we can't specifically tell you for every district what it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Erickson and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Mark, if you would, please. Thanks for being here. Just a couple quick questions. So on the definition of capacity, here we go with the old between a rock and a hard place argument. We give local control. When we give local control, then the argument comes back, lack of clarity. If we define capacity, then we're going to get, that should be up to local control. So my question to you is, if we define capacity, are you, at a state level, are you willing to accept that in the spirit of providing clarity and a firm definition that's uniform for the reporting purposes?
Well, our members have adopted a policy of not wanting this bill. I think what we're simply saying is if the legislature ultimately disagrees with that, we're just calling to your attention the fact that allowing that local flexibility, which we think is generally good, is likely to create a lot of disagreements over what that would be. And our concern is we don't want to then come back in a year and say, you let us set it. Districts use different criteria for doing so, and then there'll be complaints about that. So, I mean, I guess respectfully, we would rather not have the bill. I guess if we have to have the bill, we'd rather have that local flexibility. But I guess I'm just saying, I suspect then there will be disagreement about how that's being implemented. Just be aware of that.
A second question, if I may, Madam Chair, quickly. So you had stated about transportation that, well, there'll be some students perhaps that won't be able to provide this. And so is your argument that because not everyone can participate, no one should be able to participate?
I think our argument is simply that if the purpose of the bill is to give all students more opportunities, we're simply noting it does not do that. And it particularly would not help students who would have difficulty getting that transportation. The reason the legislature, the state policy has been to provide transportation is understanding that over a certain point, it's probably necessary for kids to attend. So if the policy choice is to say we want to let students have the opportunity to go to another district, it would seem to be consistent you would want to extend that to those students as well.
Senator Petty, then Senator Gossage.
So I had these questions that couldn't be answered by the revisor. So the two of them, the one dealing with the process, so that of appeal, did you take any thoughts about how long that would take?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with the idea that if boards generally, many only meet once a month, and the state board only meets once a month, there would certainly be some time to run through that whole process. I think that's just the way it would work out.
Okay, secondly, and this goes back to what you just brought up about capacity. So the issue is that definition that, and yet it would be the audits would be based on who had been approved, and who had been denied. And then from what we have in the bill, could you tell who determines the accuracy and what it's based on?
Well, my interpretation of the bill is that when districts would be audited, they would be looked at as to whether they were following their own policy. So if you have a policy that says we're going to base it on physical capacity, square footage per student, that's what would be looked at. If you're going to base it on the number of staff, pupil-teacher ratios, those sorts of things, my interpretation is they would be audited to see whether they were following their own policy, which might be very different across different districts. And then the state board, likewise, would be asked to say, are you following your own policy? That's my interpretation.
Thank you.
So we have Senator Gossage, and we'll finish up with Senator Erickson. We will finish up with Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Finally, Mark. I want to go back to what a previous conferee had said about, let's take a look at the purpose of this bill. So my question to start with is, do you think that all school districts meet every student's needs?
Do I think, well, I know that every school district is legally responsible for providing an education that meets state and federal requirements. That's what they all try to do. Is that ideal for every student in the same way? I don't know if I would agree with that. I don't know whether that's possible, and it certainly wouldn't be would be required under this bill either.
So let me ask it another way. As a parent of a child who's very academically inclined, the school that my child went to, public school, did not have an IB program. His father and I want us to be in an IB program, but that's not possible. His needs would best be served at a school that has an IB program in a neighboring district. Should that be allowed based on that student's individual needs?
Well, I think one thing that could be looked at, maybe better than this, is whether there is some way to encourage districts or assist districts in working together to provide unique programs if they're going to do it. But I know one thing that some of those districts might say, and it may not be the case of an IB program, is to say, we as a district, our taxpayers are choosing to offer a higher level of services, additional programs, better facilities, and our taxpayers are paying for that. And students in another district whose parents have not and patrons have not made that same decision, I think some of their concern might be, should those parents come into a district where they're not paying kind of the same level of support as that community has done? I think that's one thing that will at least be looked at, and one reason why some communities may not favor this.
I find that interesting, Madam Chair, because I hear over and over that our education system is designed wholly for the best interests of the child, not for local taxpayers, who, by the way, pay a lot of money across the board. It's not about transportation, and it's a waste of time to make people report out on things when the heart of it is to provide opportunities for every child based on what their parent deems is the best educational opportunity. And because a parent doesn't have the means to afford any other option, they don't get those opportunities. But it's interesting to me to hear all of the reasons why this isn't possible instead of how can we work together, I like what you said about that, to ensure that the focus is on meeting student needs. Student needs.
I think,
and not every district is the same. Not every district offers the same programs that might meet a child's needs. So my challenge would be this. We talk about problem solving and critical thinking in our schools. We pride ourselves on that's what we're preparing our students to do. How about the adults? Do some problem solving and critical thinking to come up with solutions rather than we can't have this for the kids because of adult issues. So I'm right now offering, I'm willing to work with you or anybody on that to make sure that every kid has the educational opportunity they deserve. And we stop throwing up roadblocks and obstacles based on adult issues, and we do what we say, which is provide education for our kids. So I would love to work with you on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
it's not a question, but I would agree. We got to do better at doing that.
So committee, you need to work on amendments for this bill, also amendments for other bills that we have heard, so that we can continue to be working these bills. Thank you. We are adjourned.